So let's get started. Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to this evening's panel, which is a discussion that is going to focus on supporting parents in small business. And I know I'm preaching the converted here when I say that running a pharmacy is hard work. So I'm sure you're all very keen to get into the presentation as quickly as possible. So I'm going to focus on that for now and get through the little bit of housekeeping that we have just so that we can get started and get on our way. So my name is Daniel Oyston. I'm a marketer, and so mostly I work with small and medium businesses, but some of you may recognise my voice as the host of the Guild's PBCN podcast. So if you aren't a regular listener, I'm very disappointed in you, but please jump on because there's lots of great guests and topics and people sharing all sorts of things to help your business and career. But tonight, we obviously have a webinar. So as I said, I'm going to move fairly quickly as there isn't a lot of spare time in the agenda usually, and we need to get to our presenters quickly because that's why we are all here tonight. So we would love for you to be involved in the session. So that is definitely how you will get the most out of it. So please post your questions in the chat anytime. I'll be keeping an eye on it as Vanessa and Georgie are presenting. I've done lots of webinars and panel hosting in my time. So trust me, I can tell you that the guests, they really do love getting questions from you. So please don't be shy. Pop them in the chat at any time. You don't have to wait until the end of the presentation. However, we are on a tight time frame, as I said, and we need to be respectful of people's time. So if we have a question we can't get to it, I promise that I will organise a follow-up with Georgie and Vanessa and get an answer for you. And of course, the session is being recorded and it's available fairly quickly after we finish the session. As I said, running a pharmacy is hard work. It can be difficult keeping up with the legislation changes, the managing staff, keeping the lights on, let alone having all the information that you need to manage a parent who is about to go on parental leaving. So it's not surprising that when faced with a expectant employee, many small businesses, they kind of just choose to leave the planning for later, for that elusive moment when they have time to deal with it, that perfect time. However, if you get the process wrong, you miss the mark, the impact that it can have on the expectant staff member and the flow-on effects to your business and other staff members, it can be quite damaging, it can be enormous. So in this webinar, which is presented by Transitioning Well psychologist Vanessa Miles and Georgie Chapman, who's a partner at HR Legal, we're going to discuss how best to manage the process from pregnancy announcement through to the return to work to ensure that you're not just covering your legal obligations, but you're doing your best to support the mental health and well-being of your staff members as well. Because after all, as we know, the happier that your staff are, that leads to better outcomes for your business. So without further ado, let's welcome Vanessa and Georgie. Over to you, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel. And thanks everybody for having us. Well, Georgie and I are really very excited to be talking to you tonight and giving you what we hope will be some really practical and tangible tips that you can take forward to support your new and expectant parents in the workplace, or indeed if you are a business owner who is expecting, we hope that you'll take something away from this as well. So the name of the webinar is Supporting Parents in Small Business, but this is part of a broader project called the Australian Perinatal Workplace Wellbeing Program, which for short is APWWP, which doesn't really help anybody much more than the long name. But anyway, that's the name of it. And I'll tell you a little bit about the project as we go through. But I did just want to make you aware that during the webinar, we will briefly cover the hidden journeys to parenthood. So we will talk very briefly about miscarriage and stillbirth, the legal obligations of employers, and also the wellbeing implications for you as a business owner. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. We won't be covering it in detail, but we will have a couple of slides on that topic. So let's jump in. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of where we are going to travel this evening. The first part that we'll talk about is perinatal mental health in general. So we're going to talk about what it means, why do we particularly focus on this in the perinatal period, and how to recognise some of the signs and symptoms of it. Then I'll give you a bit of an overview of the project itself. and why we're doing this project. And then we're going to jump into what we call the Working Parent Roadmap. So that is the journey of parenthood, from the journeys to parenthood. We're going to really hone in on the parental leave space, and then we'll talk a little bit about the ongoing seasons of parenthood after that. So Georgie and I will tag team a little bit. Georgie is going to cover the legal obligations from a business perspective, and I'm going to talk about the wellbeing implications and best practice for your workplace. Then we are going to talk about the Parent Well, which is the digital platform that we're creating, that we'd like to invite you to take a look at, and then we'll make sure that we leave enough time for Q&A at the end. So as you go through, any questions that occur to you, please put them straight in the chat, and Daniel will either interrupt us if it's specifically relevant to what we're talking about at the time. Otherwise, he'll hold it to the end and we'll make sure that we've got time for that. So just talking about perinatal mental health more broadly. So it refers to the mental health problems that can occur from conception through to baby's first birthday, the perinatal period. And we include adoptive parents in that. So the journey to parenthood might look different in the first part of the perinatal period for adoptive parents, but certainly the postnatal period can look very similar. And the reason why we're specifically talking about perinatal here is that it is the time in a person's life where they are most likely to develop a mental health problem for the first time, or have a previous condition relapse or recur. So it is a particularly risky time. Any transition in life is riskier in terms of mental health, and perinatal mental health in particular. So perinatal mental health distress is quite common, and then 1 in 5 mums and 1 in 10 dads are actually diagnosed with a mental health condition. So that's 86,000 people a year. So if you think about the people in your workplace, if they are expecting a baby or in new parenthood, there is a reasonable chance that they might show some of the symptoms of perinatal mental health distress. And what we'd like to do in today's session is talk to you about how you can support them through that. One of the, little arrow popped up. One of the things that is particularly difficult when it comes to perinatal mental health is that there are a lot of barriers to help seeking. And the first one, and possibly the most significant one, I guess, is that the symptoms of perinatal mental health are often misattributed because there's so much else going on. So how many times have you heard a pregnant person or a dad who's just had a baby say, no, I'm just exhausted, it'll be fine, I'll be fine tomorrow. And they might be fine tomorrow. But the problem is that there are so many things going on when you are expecting or when you've just had a baby. It's very easy to dismiss the symptoms and pass them off as, that's just the package of parenthood, or it's just hormones, it's just lack of sleep. So we're going to spend a bit of time tonight just looking at the signs and symptoms and really getting our heads around why it looks so similar to what else is going on and why it's so difficult to spot, and how you can look out for it in the workplace. The second thing that prevents help seeking is shame and stigma. So, an individual might mask their symptoms because they're worried about people judging them, not only as a person, but also as a parent. There are some stats that I'll share with you in a little while around discrimination. There are real fears of that. And there's a lot of other things that go into not wanting to speak up about struggling. So, many individuals come from a culture where reaching out for help is not culturally acceptable, or they may have parents who say, you'll be fine, you just need to, brace yourself and get on with it. So some of those elements of shame or stigma also prevent people from reaching out. The next one is high expectations. So this is, I should be able to do this better. I should be able to cope. I shouldn't be complaining. I should be grateful. So, parents tend to have very high expectations of themselves. And so a lot of the time people just don't, they just deny the mental health symptoms and assume that they will pass on their own. And unfortunately, that's often not the case. We know that the earlier people seek help, the fewer symptoms and the shorter duration of symptoms they experience. So reaching out is a particularly important strategy when people are struggling. The next thing that often happens is misinformation. So people not really understanding what someone's going through can lead them to be not very empathetic or not very supportive. So, what did they expect? Of course, they're going to be exhausted. That's nothing. Think about how hard it was in my day. I had terrible experience, much worse than what you're experiencing, or just, don't worry, it'll be okay. I'm sure you're fine. Don't worry about it. So there are lots of things that can prevent people from reaching out. And as I said, reaching out early can really lessen the severity and the duration of the symptoms. So there's a role for workplaces to play in being able to spot the signs and step in to support parents at this time. I'll just encourage you to use the chat to just jump in and type in any other barriers you can think of that may prevent people from reaching out for help. I can't see the chat, but I'll just let you guys have a chat without me while I carry on to the next part. So let's jump into actually talking about the signs and symptoms. The first point I'd like to make is that the combination and severity of symptoms will be different for every parent. So it will look slightly different, but there are some consistencies that are quite straightforward to spot. And the key thing here is that it's about changes. How does this individual show up differently to the way that they did before? And of course, the longer you know someone, the easier it is to spot this. So this table is from the Panda website, and they break out the symptoms into 3 areas. So changes to mood, changes to behavior, and changes to relationships. And I think that's a really handy way to break it down, because as you can see, there's a lot of symptoms in there. You may not see all of this in the workplace, but I think that if you can keep in mind, it is really about differences between before and after. That is what should be ringing some alarm bells. So without going through this slide in detail, there's a couple of things you can see in here where you can understand why people get this confused with regular parent stuff. So, in here is, persistent fatigue. Well, anyone who's a parent on the call probably going, well, isn't that, I've been tired for 12 years or whatever it is. So, persistent fatigue is something that you often experience when you have children. But when you put it together with some of the other things, you can see a bit of a pattern. Appetite changes, really common. Withdrawing from friends and family. So during COVID, I know that, pharmacies were obviously essential services and were largely open, but if you were a new parent on paternity leave or maternity leave, nobody may have noticed that you were withdrawing from friends or family. There's also the fact that you're busy with a newborn. So if you are withdrawing, people might just assume that you are busy with your child. So again, it's quite tricky sometimes to separate out and realize that there's a problem. And that's where the changes comes in. Again, it's about recognizing that something's different to what it was before. And if you're not sure, just reaching out to that parent to check in with them, ask if they're okay, and actually raise their awareness around the prevalence of mental health distress during this time, and also provide them with some resources that they can reach out to. So we're going to talk a lot about the ways that you can support parents throughout this process, or this transition, I should say. This slide, you will have access to this slide after the webinar. So, and also feel free to take a look at the Panda website, which is excellent. So I guess, we know that the transition to becoming a parent is one of the most significant ones that a person will go through in their lifetime. But, in terms of what's this got to do with the workplace, there is a fundamental transition from working person to working parent. So there is an identity shift that comes with moving from being a working person to a working parent. And then there is just the whole world of changes in your life, your lifestyle, and just the plain logistics of managing work and home life when you have children. So there's a lot of change that occurs in a person at this time, and there's a lot that connects that person to the workplace. And again, we're going to talk through a lot of that today. I just want to take a moment to highlight a few statistics here that I think are quite interesting and may be relevant for you in your workplace. The first one on the left is 33% here. So 33% of working parents report that they are worried and anxious. We've got the other stat here about 1 in 5 new mums and 1 in 5 new dads suffer from perinatal depression and anxiety. Down the bottom here, around parental leave retention, 1 in 4 parents and carers report that they had intended to leave their job in the next 12 months just because of the challenges of combining their job with their caring responsibilities. So we all know how long and somewhat challenging recruitment processes can be. So wherever we can find ways to retain parents after parental leave, it is good for your business. And so, for 1 in 4 parents to be reporting that they can't do this, that they just want to leave the workforce because they can't handle the juggle, means there's a real opportunity for businesses to step in and just see where you can support people to try and prevent that. Top right of the slide, perinatal discrimination. Pregnancy has overtaken disability as the top discrimination complaint in Australian workplaces, and 1 in 2 mothers and 1 in 4 fathers have reported discrimination at this life stage. And then finally, at the bottom right, 37% of young fathers cite lack of flexibility as a prime reason they consider leaving their jobs, and the cost of replacing a new mother is estimated to be 150% of her salary. So, sorry, I actually just point also to the safety implications. 50% of all parents report significant fatigue. And there was a study done on fathers of newborns that showed some quite significant fatigue-related safety risks as well. So quite a lot of connections to the workplace and quite a lot of things that we can do to try and prevent some of these statistics from rising. So let me take a moment to tell you a little bit about the project. The project or the program is designed to improve the mental health and wellbeing of expectant and new parents in small businesses across Australia. And we are about halfway through the 3-year project. It's funded by the Australian Government, the Department of Health. And the first thing we did was to consult industry. So we had one-to-one interviews with small business owners and new and expectant parents across 3 industries, of which pharmacy was one. And hopefully some of the people that we spoke to in those interviews are on the call today, and that will allow them to see the fruits of their labour. We conducted a number of interviews to understand what are the challenges and the opportunities that having a baby when you're working in a small business presents. So we spoke to parent employees, small business owners, and also small business owners who are having children themselves. So the purpose of that was to really understand the consistent issues across all small business, but then also understand what's happening in pharmacy specifically. We then went into a process which is, I guess, still ongoing around content development, and we scoped out the digital platform, which is the culmination of this project. And where we are now is pilot phase 1. So that means that we have a digital platform up and running almost. It goes live in a couple of weeks, and there's an opportunity for you to go and have a look and provide your feedback so that we can get it in tip-top shape for when we launch it across Australia early next year. So the rest of the project involves just refining it, making some digital modifications, and then we will pilot it again in early 2024. And then we will just evaluate the program. So at the moment, and up until the end of this project, the platform is completely free, and it provides you with a roadmap, which we're going to talk you through this evening, about how you can best support your people during this time, or in fact, support you if you're a business owner who's needing to step back from the business to have a baby yourself. So let's talk a little bit about what we heard from pharmacists. We spoke to a number of pharmacists across Australia, and we, as I said, we got broad themes around small businesses, and then we got themes that were specific to pharmacists. And this is what we heard. The first thing was conversations around parental leave can be really difficult to navigate. There's a bit of anxiety about saying the wrong thing, a little bit of uncertainty about legal obligations and employee entitlements, and really just not knowing how to bring it up and how to ask some of those tricky questions. So we've got lots of things to support you with that. The second thing, which you will all be very familiar with, is just limited resources. So, limited ability to provide paid parental leave, for example, difficulty finding cover, especially if you have a small workforce, and the legal obligation to have a pharmacist on site all the time. And then just as a small business owner, the time to actually sit down and plan for it, to actually be proactive about the coming change. So we heard from lots of business owners that said, I basically just ignore it until it becomes urgent, and then I really, scramble to fix things up. So hopefully some of the tips and strategies we'll give you tonight will help you avoid that. We heard about how demanding the environment is. So we spoke to pregnant or new parents who said it's just physically demanding to be pregnant in a pharmacy, standing up all the time, reaching the dispensary, speaking to clients, customers, walking around the pharmacy. But also cognitively demanding. And the worry when you come back from parental leave around wanting to do the best for your customers and realizing that there is a risk associated with making a mistake, but also needing to support your family. So that real cognitive challenge of being back in the pharmacy environment while you are raising a small family. We heard about the restraints on flexibility. Again, coming back to needing a pharmacist on site, it's difficult to offer as much flexibility as might be available in other environments. So that one was a tricky one. Guilt around wanting to be there for your team or be there in the pharmacy, but also knowing that there are home demands as well. Workforce shortages, and obviously the intense workloads that pharmacists experienced during COVID and the vaccine rollouts. Registration costs and PD requirements. So the challenges of maintaining registration and meeting the PD requirements when you're on leave, for example. And then the hidden journeys to parenthood. And we heard from a number of parents who said it's really quite challenging if you are trying to conceive or you've experienced some loss and then having to deal with the public who might be expecting or who might ask quite deeply personal questions about your own perinatal journey. So really having to deal with that on top of what you're going through in your own journey. So I'll just leave you for a moment to read some of the quotes we heard from pharmacists. So there's a comment there about a high-risk job. You need to, support my family, but I don't want to hurt people by being at work. There's a quote here around financial pressure. So really feeling like you need to get back to work as quickly as possible. And we spoke to somebody who was back on a 12-hour shift when their baby was just 6 weeks old. The challenges of being able to cover when someone's sick. Comments around guilt because you want to be at home with your baby, but you also know that the team might be really challenged workforce-wise and struggling without you. We had some parents who had experienced pregnancy loss and talked about those interactions with the public. And then just the physical challenges. And one of the mums said she used to do 10,000 steps a day easily within a dispensary. So having done the September challenge where I needed to do 10,000 steps a day during lockdown, I can vouch for that being a lot of steps. I didn't make it most of the time. So I just invite you to pause for a moment. There's a quote here from one of the people we spoke to who said, I fell into a really deep depression. I was constantly paranoid. I didn't know where I stood at work, and I was wondering if all workplaces were like this. This is a mum who experienced quite a negative experience with first parental leave, and then went to a new workplace when she had her second child. And it was there that she realized just how negative the first one had been. She thought that all workplaces were like that. And it really impacted on her perinatal mental health into the second child as well. So we know from research that the role of the leader is really pivotal in terms of transition success. So being able to support the parents, the role of the manager really makes an incredible difference. So I'd love you to just have take a moment to write into the chat, what are the key challenges that supporting working parents presents for you as a manager or a business owner? So I'll ask you to answer that one first. And then in a moment, I'll ask you to type in the opportunities. And Daniel, if you could just read out as some of the responses come through, then we can just hear some of those challenges. So let's start with the challenges. What challenges
So Vanessa, can I just interrupt for 2 seconds? 2 seconds. I just want to clarify for people if we could just put that in the question and answers, not the webinar chat. So yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So yes, put it in the Q&A section. What are the key challenges that supporting working parents presents for you as a manager or a business owner?
We'll see how shy people are. So the first one here, Vanessa, says, how do we apply for maternity or paternity leave?
Okay. I might hold that question if you don't mind, because I think some of what Georgie talks about will clarify that, and then we can revisit that and make sure that we've got that clear.
Yeah, next one is matching the childcare arrangements to the workplace requirements.
Yeah.
That sounds easy.
Unfortunately, it's not quite like Lego, is it? Yeah. So, you know, that really sort of starts to come down to the challenges that being in a pharmacy environment and the restraints on flexibility that exist around needing to have someone on site at all times, having a pharmacist on site at all times, and how do you manage that with the constant juggle?
Yeah, I might throw a personal one out there if I can.
Sure.
So I always found it a struggle to support working parents when the sort of the priorities of work start to clash with some of those family things that get thrown up, like my child's sick, or you know, I have to go to an athletics carnival. And, you know, without speaking ill of people, some people that seems to be a constant struggle for them to manage and find the balance. And for others, they naturally seem to be able to do it. I always found that a bit of a struggle, because you don't want to say no to people. You know, we know how important it is to be there for your kids, and you're also, you know, one of the two primary carers in the household. So I always found that quite difficult, not just, you know, just trying to find the balance, so to speak.
Yeah, look, you're definitely not alone, Daniel, and I think that we hear that quite often with our clients. And we do a lot of parental leave coaching, so we speak to a lot of people who are going through this. And I guess from a business owner perspective, you know, we're going to talk about some of the strategies in a moment. Opening up the conversations and really understanding what is going on for your employee in relation to their family or their work responsibilities, and really building an ability. Sorry, we now have dogs outside the window. Really opening up a conversation so that you know what they're experiencing and you can problem solve together to go, well, what if we tried this, and how could I help you to manage that better? It's sometimes really about helping somebody to actually map it out and create some kind of structure around what can be quite a chaotic time. So definitely not alone in experiencing that. And hopefully when we jump into some of the strategies, you might see some areas where you as a business owner or you as a parent might be able to have some conversations to just open up that topic.
Yeah, because it's interesting listening to you speak, because people come from different family structures, backgrounds, commitments, all that sort of stuff. My mum was a theatre nurse. My dad was in the Air Force. So their ability to just be able to leave work to be there for an athletics carnival or, you know, a painting exhibition. You know, I grew up just, you know, my parents, it's not that they didn't want to be there, they just weren't able to be there. So when I've then had staff in the future, you know, I'm probably not as engaged with going to every little thing that happens at school for the kids. I think, I won't go to that prayer assembly. They're just reading a prayer out or a little part, whereas other parents have come from completely different family structures and backgrounds, and they are all in. So I think that's something that people probably need to be aware of. There's a couple more here for you, Vanessa. Feeling confident that the parent has their brain fully focused on the workplace and not concerned and chatting constantly about the child.
Yeah, okay.
And then another one, managing multiple parents in a single workplace and providing equality and fairness while also keeping the business operating, which kind of touched on the one that I, you know, kind of lines up with the one I mentioned.
Yeah, they are really great points, and really important to know that, you know, you're not alone in some of those challenges. It can be really tricky to support working parents with the best of intentions. At the end of the day, you are trying to run a business. So there's no question that it can be, one of your employees might tell them that they are planning to go on parental leave, and it's really normal for your first reaction to be, oh, not now, please don't do it now, or I wish this wasn't happening right now, or how am I going to fill this gap? That is the reaction of a lot of business owners, and it's really understandable because it's challenging, it's tough. And so, if that is your first reaction, let me tell you that you are not alone in that. It's not easy, and some of the challenges can be a bit tricky, but like I said, hopefully when we get into some of the strategies, you might feel that you've got a little bit more control over how you manage that transition and how you can really set yourself up and set your employee up to have a positive experience. I'll just ask you quickly to jump in and say any opportunities you can spot when you're supporting working parents. Just give you a minute or two to type in some of those.
While people are coming up with some opportunities, I mean, I'm not a pharmacist, but I speak to lots of pharmacists and talking to lots of people in and around the industry, and pharmacists practicing to their full scope of practice is clearly a hot topic. Consulting rooms, finding other revenue streams. I wonder if there's an opportunity for parents who, how do I phrase this? Managing children's health where, for want of a better phrase, it's not just plain sailing. They might have a child who has a lot of reflux issues, or I'm trying to think, my kids are 14 and 12 now, so it's a long time ago, but nutrition issues. And so parents might start to create a real area of interest that helps their family, but it also becomes something that they can offer to other families in the pharmacy.
Great idea, Daniel. I think what we find with a lot of parents is that it does change their perspective and their interest in things. So it broadens the visibility of some of the things that they may not have realized they were interested in. And you can see some parents really are able to start to carve out something that is their own area of interest that ties in beautifully with their working space.
Yeah, we've had one come in. It says that it builds loyalty and contributes to retention if the parent feels supported.
Yeah, absolutely. That's borne out in research. We can see it all the time that if there is a culture of support, even if there are restrictions in certain things that you're able to offer, like paid parental leave, it's the culture of support that makes a real difference to parents. And we hear that all the time. The other thing that we hear a lot is just, there's a cultural shift. Dads are expected to be much more involved than they were. Certainly when I was a kid, my dad definitely didn't come to sports carnivals. Neither did my mum either, by the way. But it would have been more common to see my mum than my dad. And, if you just think about how much dads are more hands-on in typical families now compared to previous generations. So there is a bit of an opportunity to explore with individuals what are the things that you really want to be a part of with your kids, and how can we make that work? So that doesn't just help the dad or the mum, it helps anyone in your business to have a conversation about what would a good work-life arrangement be for you, and are there any opportunities for us to help you with that, to the extent that it supports the business as well. All right, let's move on to the next part. So we're now going to get stuck straight into the working parent roadmap. And I know that you're probably very keen to hear from Georgie, who's going to talk you through your legal obligations. As I said, the working parent roadmap consists of three sort of separate buckets in the way that we view it. So the first one is the pre-parental stage. We often refer to this as the hidden journeys to parenthood because a lot of it is not spoken about. So here we are talking about couples who are trying to conceive. It includes various journeys such as pregnancy loss or fertility treatments. It also includes adoption and surrogacy journeys. So this is the period of time that you as a business owner may not even know that your employee is experiencing it, which makes it in some ways difficult to know how to support parents. But what we do know is that if you can support if you can create that culture of support, you will be supporting these parents because you raise the likelihood of them coming to you and letting you know what's going on, or it allows them to see that you are supporting other parents in the business and therefore you're more likely to support them even though you don't know the journey yet. So the pre-parental phase is something that we'll cover towards the end of the seminar. What we're really going to focus on is this central part, which is the baby arriving. So that's, women who are pregnant, dads who are expecting, people who are adopting. The adoption journey is quite different because you may not know the dates of adoption, or you may get very short notice for an adoption, but we talk about this more generally. In the middle, it's when baby arrives and what you can do during parental leave. And then the third one with a little briefcase is when you're starting to think about returning to work. And then finally, we'll cover the ongoing seasons of parenthood. So that's things like the next transition. So you transition your kids into daycare, then you transition your kids into prep or kindy, then you might be transitioning them into high school. It can feel like the transitions are plentiful, but what we do know is that the strategies that you use around parental leave can also be applied to the ongoing seasons. So you get kind of good bang for your buck if you can really adopt some of these strategies during the parental leave process. We've got a little, shortcut, I guess, to navigate this parental leave process, and we call it the Plan, Connect, Setup. So plan is around planning your parental leave, connect is what you do during parental leave, and then set up is when you're preparing to return. So I'm going to talk quickly about the wellbeing aspects, and then I'm going to jump across to Georgie, who's going to talk to you about the legal obligations. So the first step of the process, this is all about preparing for parental leave. And the first step that we recommend is to familiarise yourself with the government-funded paid parental leave scheme, as well as any company-specific entitlements you might offer. And in there should be, I don't know where it's gone, but should be familiarising yourself with the legal obligations, which is what I know many of you are here for. The government-funded paid parental leave scheme is, as you know, government-funded and operates through your business. So just having some of the basics around how to administer that is helpful. And so consequently, we've developed a tip sheet to just help you as a business owner figure out how on earth you apply for that and how do you do that in your accounting system. The second thing is to set up time with the expectant parent, either the mum or the dad, to talk about the key dates and their options for parental leave. So as a business owner, really getting clear about what date the baby is likely to arrive, and therefore being able to work backwards and start to set yourself up for planning ahead. And talking to your expectant parent about parental leave and what their intentions are. So as you'll hear from Georgie shortly, there are some various different ways in which people can take parental leave. So getting an early indication of what the parent is thinking is helpful. For birth mothers, you might need to consider safety. So if there's a lot of heavy lifting, if they are working particularly long hours or on their feet, you may need to talk about what adjustments they might need. As you get closer to the time when someone goes on parental leave, you may like to create a handover plan if that's needed, or at least a cover plan. So how will you fill the gap? And as we know, recruitment sometimes takes a long time. So this is one that we suggest thinking about quite early on, especially if you are looking for someone who has very specific skills. We always recommend a keeping in touch plan and how you might use your keeping in touch days. So a keeping in touch plan is literally an agreement between you and your employee about how much they want to keep in contact while they are on leave. Some people will want to hear about major changes in the business. Some people will want to hear from you every couple of months, and some people will prefer to wait until they're ready to come back. Any of those options are okay, but it's really useful to have a conversation with them so that you don't feel uncomfortable about calling them or checking in to see how they are and all the rest. Georgie will talk to you a little bit about keeping in touch days, which is a bit of a golden nugget for retention, because you're able to really keep connected to the person who's on leave so that when they come back into your business, they're more likely to be able to hit the ground running or just really be able to establish themselves in the business a bit more easily. And then finally, we always suggest giving a good send-off when they're ready to have the baby. So let me pause for breath and have a drink of water while Georgie talks to you about the legal obligations. Over to you, Georgie.
Thanks, Vanessa. So, great to be here tonight, everyone. I will say from the beginning, for those of you who have felt a little bit overwhelmed with what are the obligations, where do we begin, all those sorts of things, I want to say it's understandable. The primary source of obligations on employers and entitlements of employees are from the Fair Work Act. I'm sure you're all familiar with that piece of legislation, at least by name. And under the Fair Work Act, we have what's known as the National Employment Standards, which are minimum standards of sort of employment conditions that apply across the board, irrespective of industry or occupation. And one of those is parental leave. And I've got to say, out of all of the national employment standards, I think the parental leave rules are probably the most complex, and they have been subject to change over the years. So there is complexity there, but we are going to take you through the primary obligations and entitlements so that you do feel you have the key notes, and then you should be well placed to support and have conversations with people in your business. So in terms of the basic entitlement to parental leave, that is for employees who have 12 months of continuous service with the business. So that's for full-time or part-time employees if they have reached that service threshold of 12 months, and also for casual employees who've completed 12 months continuous service on a regular and systematic basis, and where they have that reasonable expectation of ongoing employment were it not for them going on parental leave. So that's when they are entitled to unpaid parental leave under the Fair Work Act. And that basic entitlement to unpaid parental leave is for 52 weeks of unpaid leave. And there are some sort of qualifications on that and entitlements for requesting extensions and the like, which I'll talk to in a moment. Now, it's important to note that when we're talking about parental leave, if it is an employee who's part of a couple and their partner also wants to take parental leave, there's a general rule that parental leave is only taken by one member of that partnership at a time, or so the spouses are not on parental leave at the same time, but there are some exceptions. So, for instance, if there's someone who's having birth-related leave, so they're giving birth and their partner wants to take leave around the time of birth, and that might be your employee whose partner is having the baby, your employee will then be able to take what's known as concurrent leave, and that is up to 8 weeks of unpaid leave, which is taken at the same time as their partner, and that can be taken in one big hit, or it can be taken in lots of 2 weeks or otherwise as agreed. So there's different types of unpaid parental leave, but generally one person takes it at a time if there is a couple who are having a child. And that sort of relates to that birth-related leave, as I said. As Vanessa foreshadowed at the beginning, this also covers adoption leave. So it's 52 weeks for someone who's going to adopt a child. Now, in terms of taking leave, ideally the employee will request leave, and there is a requirement that they provide 10 weeks written notice of the expected date of the leave beginning, if that is practicable, or if not, as soon as practicable. And the notice needs to specify the start and finish dates, and then 4 weeks prior to the expected start date, they're required to confirm those leave dates, unless that's not practicable. So, for instance, if the baby arrived early, or there was a challenge in terms of the start date because of, for instance, adoption times being unpredictable. And so generally the leave will start, if it's someone who's a pregnant employee, will start from any time within 6 weeks of the expected due date. And if they want to continue working during that period from 6 weeks out onwards, then you can require a medical certificate just to make sure you're comfortable that it is safe for them to work. And generally speaking, when that person who is pregnant is going to commence leave, it'll be 6 weeks, anywhere from 6 weeks out, or otherwise earlier if you agree. But their leave does have to start on the date of the birth of the child. Now, there's also some recent changes that have been made to the Fair Work Act, so that if someone does give birth prematurely and their child is then in hospital for a certain period of time, they are able to pause their leave and recommence work if it's safe to do so, and then restart their leave once the child comes back from hospital. So it's just worth bearing in mind, if one of your employees gives birth prematurely, there are those options available if that's something that the employee wants. And if you have an employee whose partner has taken parental leave and they are then going to take parental leave, they are able to commence their leave if it's not concurrent leave when their partner ceases to have responsibility for care of the child. And with adoption leave, the commencement date is when the child is placed with the family. Now, as I foreshadowed, there are some options for extensions. So if an employee says they're going to take, say, 8 months of parental leave, anything less than that 52-week threshold, and they then say, I'd like to extend up to the 12 months, they're entitled to do that as of right. However, if they've said they're going to take 52 weeks, so that maximum entitlement, but then they have the entitlement to request an extension of a further 52 weeks, so that would go up to the 2-year mark. That's a right to request. It's not a right to have that granted, and that request can be refused on reasonable business grounds. So it's a case-by-case scenario, but of course, for small businesses, sometimes there is less, capacity to be able to agree to that sort of extension. So I guess it becomes a discussion with the individual employee, bearing in mind wanting to keep them on the track to coming back to work, but also being able to provide them with that support if they need it. We've also had some recent changes in terms of what's known as flexible parental leave. So flexible parental leave is where an employee can take part of their entitlement to parental leave as over the course of the 24 months from the date of birth of the child or placement, as a single continuous period of 1 or more days, or separate periods of 1 day on each occasion. So what that effectively enables them to do is sort of come back into the workplace on a sort of graduated basis, but still take a little bit of extra leave. So I guess it was just a reflection or an indication by the lawmakers that, sometimes it's not just a matter of leave and then you're back at work and that's the end of it. It's allowing some of those flexible approaches, and I think I'm starting to see businesses harness that more and more, sometimes where employees want to start participating in the workplace more quickly, but they want to have the option to take that flexible leave. So that, I think, is something that can work in both the business and the individual's favour. So different ways and entitlements to taking leave. Now, some of the other considerations, and Vanessa's already flagged safety. It's a really critical one, particularly in your types of workplaces. There is an entitlement where an employee has provided medical certification that it's not safe for her to currently continue in her position as a result of the pregnancy. She's entitled to be then transferred to a safe job. If there is no safe job available, then employees are entitled to paid no safe job leave. So that I think that's a recent development over the last few years, and it's really a reflection on the impetus to try and find meaningful work for individuals to do if their role or aspects of their role are not currently safe. So it might be that it's not the entire role they're unable to do, but it might be certain aspects there needs to be some adjustments made, or perhaps some tweaks made to the scope of the role so that it is safe for them to continue. And it's also worth noting that there's what's known as special maternity leave. So employees are eligible for special maternity leave if they if they're pregnant and they are unfit for work due to a pregnancy-related illness. An example of this is people who experience severe morning sickness. And if anyone on the call has experienced that, I'm sure you're laughing because it's not just in the morning, it's all day sometimes. They might not be able to take be able to attend work as normal. So they're able to take unpaid special maternity leave at that time, and it doesn't then impact their ability to take their parental leave potentially up to 52 weeks or longer if agreed, if they take that special maternity leave. It's also available if the pregnancy ends from at least 12 weeks gestation due to miscarriage or otherwise ends. So that's the special maternity leave is available in those circumstances. And as Vanessa has foreshadowed in terms of some of those hidden seasons, we will talk about some of those potential entitlements and obligations in due course. So that is a bit of an explanation or overview of the different sources of legal entitlements and obligations. As I said, there is quite a bit to it, and there will be sort of fact sheets and things available to help guide you through all this. But those are sort of the key sources of entitlements and obligations, and we'll talk about during leave just in due course.
Thank you, Georgie. So the next stage of parental leave is, of course, when the baby arrives or when the employee goes on parental leave. And this one is all about connection. So quite simply, it's about following the keeping in touch plan that you've hopefully agreed, and starting to think flexibly when your team member does start to consider their return to work. I'm not going to go into detail about the keeping in touch days because I know that Georgie is going to cover that. But one of the really valuable ways you can use a keeping in touch day is to ramp back into work gradually. So the connect phase really is about staying in touch. When you start to think about the employee returning, there are a few mechanisms that you can use to really help them to transition back into the workforce. And that's where this bottom point around using the keeping in touch days to ramp back in can really come into its own. So just conscious of time, I'm going to skip straight back to Georgie again so that she can talk you through some of the legal entitlements and obligations for this part of the process.
Thanks, Vanessa. So in terms of the legal obligations, some of you may have workplace-specific policies that you have implemented that exceed the legal obligations. So it might be, for instance, paid leave, those sorts of things, although absolutely recognising in small businesses there's not always capacity to do so. Some of the sorts of things we see out in the market are whether there's paid leave, whether there's superannuation contributions made during paid leave and those sorts of things. They're the sort of, the value adds where there's capacity to be able to do that. But some of the other things that are worth being aware of where employees are seeking to sort of be able to have some sort of income in addition to that government-funded parental leave pay. There is the ability to use their paid leave entitlements during a period of unpaid parental leave. So they're effectively regarded as being on unpaid parental leave, but using the paid leave entitlements concurrently. So things like your annual leave or long service leave. There is a rule under the Fair Work Act that you don't take personal leave at the same time as parental leave because there's a recognition that they are different things. But it is permissible to use annual leave or long service leave during your parental leave. So that's something worth bearing in mind and discussing with your staff. There's also some proactive consultation obligations under the Fair Work Act which can arise during a period of unpaid parental leave. So employees are to be kept abreast of any decisions that you make that may have a significant effect in terms of their particular role, whether it's the status, pay, location, those sorts of things. For instance, if their role was to be made redundant while they're on parental leave, you do need to take reasonable steps to have a conversation with them about those operational changes and giving them an opportunity to discuss those changes. And that does tend to be something that can get overlooked, particularly where someone hasn't been having frequent contact during their period of leave. So it's really important to not overlook that one if there are changes being made. And then, as Vanessa has foreshadowed, keeping in touch days are a really fantastic component of the parental leave provisions in the Fair Work Act. So keeping in touch days are effectively an exception to the rule that parental leave has to be taken in one unbroken period, and flexible parental leave is also one of those exceptions. But keeping in Dutch days effectively enable an employee to have up to 10 days of paid work during a period of unpaid parental leave, which is really directed at facilitating them returning to work. So it's between the employer and the individual employee reaching agreement about these sorts of days. But it could be, for instance, if there's some sort of training, professional development, if they want to just come in for a certain period to do work-related things or help with facilitating back into their role. And it means that you're sort of reinforcing their ability to hit the ground running when they come back, and they're dipping their toe in the water of being back in that workplace environment. So it's really worth harnessing those, as Vanessa has foreshadowed, and being aware of them. And if they come in and do a keeping in touch day or one or up to 10, that is in and around their unpaid parental leave, so it doesn't break their period of unpaid parental leave.
Thank you, Georgie. And then we come to the final stage, which we call the setup phase. So this is when the individual is planning a return from leave. And the first thing is really about the concept of working together. So there are lots of different ways that people can return to work. And so the first port of call is just to have a conversation about what that parent is looking for, what their situation is, and just beginning this culture of open conversations so that you can go back and forth and start to potentially try new things without being locked into anything. So when you are starting to work together with somebody who's returning, we really strongly recommend that when you are doing something new, you might say, well, let's just try this for a month, or let's do this on a trial period, just so that you get the opportunity to try a few new things without necessarily setting things in stone and setting the expectations high enough that you can't change things in the future. Second thing is just announce the return. So really to help this person reintegrate to work. The transition back to work can be really tough. There's a lot going on for the individual. There's probably been a lot going on for you as a business owner. So to the extent that you can smooth the path, it can really make the process easier on both sides. So announcing the return to the team, if there are key stakeholders or suppliers that need to know, we suggest announcing that to them as well. Create some kind of plan for the first few weeks back. In the same way as you would plan for a new starter, you would introduce them to any new people or introduce them to the team. You might bring them up to speed with some new products or some new processes. It doesn't have to be very detailed, but just a really rough plan for these are the things you need to get your head around as you transition back into the business. And day one is particularly important to do that for, just so that everybody knows what's expected. Talk about the supports at work and at home, and consider the breastfeeding needs. So this can be really challenging in a small business. You may not have a dedicated space for someone to breastfeed, but we've had a lot of conversations with some researchers who have been looking into the enablers and barriers of breastfeeding in the workplace. And their key takeaway is that it is much more about the culture of support than it is about the practical considerations. So really being able to, and I know that Georgie will have some legal obligations to talk to you about, but it's about having the conversation to say, what do you need? And let's talk about how we can try and accommodate those needs. Again, coming back to safety, and then just checking in, the return to work is quick, but the transition process, that internal process of adapting to change, that's a long process. And it can take parents, a year or more to really feel back into the swing of things. So it's, in terms of retention, the critical time points tend to be 3 months back, 6 months back, and 12 months back. 3 months is, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. This is crazy. What am I doing? Should I even be working? This is nuts. So if you want to, that's a really good time to really check in and say, is there anything I can do to help you? Is what's working well? What's not working? What can we work together to find a solution for? 6 months is a similar critical time point. And at 12 months, parents typically have got into a little bit of a rhythm and they start to think, okay, well, I'm back now. What else is out there? So the 12-month point can also be a critical point to just check in with them and say, how are you going? What's happening with you, and how do we continue to work together well? And then, the key point is just to keep the conversations going. You've, through this process, hopefully developed that openness to talk about what considerations come into the fray and where you can make things work. And as you move into the ongoing seasons of parenting, that openness and the willingness to have conversations should serve you quite well. So back to you, Georgie, for the legal obligations.
Thanks, Vanessa. So I think one of the key obligations is the return to work guarantee. So the Fair Work Act provides that employees who take parental leave are entitled to return to their pre-parental leave position. So if we think about the pre-parental leave position, it's really their substantive role. If they were transferred to a safe job, it's not that job, it's the job they were in before they were transferred to the safe job. And if that substantive role no longer exists, they're entitled to be returned to a comparable position in status or pay. So it's really about protecting their role while they take the parental leave. It's really important to be aware of some of the protections around discrimination, or what's known as adverse action under the Fair Work Act. So there are what's known as protected attributes, things like pregnancy, parental status or parental responsibilities, and taking adverse action or discriminatory action on the basis of those protected attributes is unlawful. And it's often, in my experience, not actual overt discrimination where people are intentionally doing it, but perhaps there's a breakdown in communication which can then be misconstrued as being intentional discrimination, which I've seen in a number of cases. And I think it really goes to Vanessa's point around that, keep those conversations going. So really important to be aware of those pitfalls. It is a really critical transition for that individual. So communication will really help in terms of navigating those sorts of things. And of course, there's a right to request flexible working arrangements. So under the Fair Work Act, someone who has completed 12 months continuous service is able to request flexible working arrangements if they fall into a number of categories, and that includes having care of a school-aged child or younger. What is flexible will depend on the circumstances. It might be they want to work part-time, or they want to have change in hours, starting earlier, finishing earlier, or the inverse. And if that's the case, then an employer has to consider that. There's a number of requirements that flow, which we'll talk about in a moment. But important that we're meeting those obligations. And as Vanessa has flagged, breastfeeding arrangements. Breastfeeding is one of the protected attributes under anti-discrimination legislation, and certainly can't discriminate on the basis of breastfeeding. It's really important to proactively take steps to try and foster the ability for someone to continue, whether it's expressing or what have you at work. Obviously, there can be constraints on the ability to do that, and there is that understanding of reasonableness in the circumstances. But again, to Vanessa's point, communication is really important. So if your discussions are coming from a place of understanding and support, then you will be much better placed to be able to navigate these sorts of discussions.
So that has covered the parental leave stage in the middle, and we're just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the pre-parental stage and then the ongoing seasons. So first of all, around the hidden journeys to parenthood. So what we mean by that is pregnancy loss, fertility treatments, adoption or surrogacy, or preterm birth. And so the key things to be aware of in terms of how to respond well if an employee discloses loss. A lot of the conversations we've had with leaders is, I just don't know what to say and I don't want to make it worse. So I really just feel a little bit torn about how I can support my employee. So our guidance here, and there's lots of additional resources that we can direct you to towards the end of the webinar. Just be aware of well-intended comments that can dismiss the significance of the loss. Things like, well, it happens for a reason, or, you can try again. Those are comments that can actually be quite hurtful, even if that's not the intention. Ensure you are aware of their legal entitlements, and then make sure that they also know. So things like compassionate leave or other entitlements that are available to them. Just listen to what is most helpful. So parents tell us that each of their experiences are very different. And so really understanding, would you like to work or would you prefer to be at home? conversations like that. Ask how they would like the news to be shared, or if they would like the news to be shared. Obviously, it's quite a different situation if the pregnancy or expectation of a child has been announced to the team versus if it hasn't been announced yet, but just talking to them about what they would prefer. And then providing warm referrals. So a warm referral is a referral to a service or a resource where you've reduced the barriers as much as possible. So as an example, telling somebody to call a helpline would be a cold referral. It's not bad, but it's not great, because that parent then needs to figure out which helpline they should call, go and find the number and actually pick up the phone. A warm referral would be, I'm going to just get you a couple of helpline numbers. Here they are. They're 24 hours. You can call them anytime and they're free. So really looking at how can I make it as easy as possible for this parent to reach the support that they need. And again, we'll provide you with some of that information shortly. And then that question of how do you support people when you might not even be aware that they are trying to conceive? And that comes back to that open culture and open conversations about some of these things so that they can see it happening with other parents. But you're also building relationships with your team members around what they are juggling in their home and work life, so that there is a sort of culture of support and trust where they might come to you and let you know, or at least know that if they wanted to, they would be able to. So over to you, Georgie, before I turn to you, these are a couple of the resources that you can have access to after this webinar. The first one on the left-hand side is an interactive conversation training package that we developed through this program. You can practice the conversation with a pre-recorded actor. So you can select various options of what to say, and then you will get the reaction from the individual on the screen. So we've got a number of them, mums and dads, that just give you as a leader the ability to practice some of the conversations and learn some of the things that you should say and maybe shouldn't say. We're also partners with COPE, the Centre of Perinatal Excellence, in this project. And on their website, they have an incredible series of videos known as the Truth Campaign. That is a really valuable resource for you to pass on to any employees who are going through loss and other stages of perinatal mental health as well. There's a list there of some of the supports available to refer to your staff members if needed. Georgie?
Thanks, Vanessa. So some of the things that are really important to understand in this space we have already talked to. So the source of entitlements, again, is the Fair Work Act. But I do want to reiterate there's also those protections around discrimination in terms of pregnancy and the like. I already flagged the special maternity leave that can be available in circumstances of miscarriage, and also paid compassionate leave for permanent employees. There's entitlements to transfer to the safe job, as I mentioned earlier. Employees can use their paid personal leave if they need to attend examinations. And it's also important in terms of pre-adoption processes, employees are entitled to time off to attend appointments, and it's usually 2 days under the National Employment Standards. Where employees are undergoing treatments such as fertility treatment or surrogacy arrangements, those sorts of things, these aren't currently things that are contemplated under the National Employment Standards. So generally they're covered by other types of leave, whether it's if someone's undergoing certain treatment that makes them unable to attend work, they may be entitled to paid personal leave, other sorts of leave like annual leave if it doesn't meet those sorts of thresholds. But again, really important to be able to provide that environment where people can have those sorts of personal conversations if that's something they want to be able to share. In terms of infant loss, we've talked about miscarriage already. Stillbirth, if that tragically occurs where it's past or up to 20 weeks gestation or beyond, and the baby is stillborn, there have been changes made to the Fair Work Act where the employee is entitled to take unpaid parental leave, so the 52 weeks. They're also entitled to paid compassionate leave. And, in terms of return to work, that tends to be a discussion with the individual, but really important that you are respecting those entitlements and making space for the conversations when that person is ready. And I did mention premature birth earlier, so the changes around where there's that start and stop of leave. If someone has the child and the child remains in hospital, they're able to recommence work and then recommence their period of unpaid parental leave once the child comes home.
Thank you, Georgie. And then finally, let's talk very briefly, being very conscious of time here, and I want to make sure that there's time to answer any of your questions. We're going to talk quickly about the ongoing seasons of parenthood. So the first step here is actually to know who they are. If you have a very small business, that's pretty straightforward. If your business is larger or you have multiple sites, this is really about just understanding who in your business is a parent. Some of them you may not know because they had their children a long time ago, but knowing who your working parents and carers are, encouraging them to understand their entitlements and their needs. And although COVID-19 is, perhaps not as pressing a concern as it once was, certainly we're still seeing some of the parents who had babies during the lockdowns. That has had a lasting impact on them as a family. And so if you know of somebody in your business who did have a baby during that period, maybe just keep an extra eye on them, because the effects of that experience has not left everybody. Again, just understanding the policies and actually making sure that they're implemented, and really adopting a where there's a will, there's a way approach. And that's what we mean when we talk about having a flexible mindset. We know that it's not always easy to do some of these changes, and sometimes it's just plain not possible in a small business setting. But coming at it of, I'm sure we can work something out, that kind of approach goes a long way to allowing people to just throw out ideas and seeing what might work. And then coming back to that idea of just trialing a few things, trial it for a couple of weeks and see what happens, can sometimes open the door to some interesting possibilities. So the legal obligations.
So thanks, Vanessa. As I mentioned earlier, the flexible working arrangements under the Fair Work Act for employees who've completed 12 months continuous service. If someone makes a written request, there are some obligations triggered. You need to respond within 21 days. And if you're unable to accommodate that request, you can only refuse it on reasonable business grounds. And there are some requirements under the current modern awards, including the Pharmacy Industry Award, that require you to meet with the employee to genuinely discuss and consider their request, and if you're unable to accommodate it, to set out the reasons why based on reasonable business grounds, and also look at potential alternatives. And as Vanessa's flagged, nothing ever stays the same, both for you and for the individual. So it's worth having ongoing conversations, revisiting flexible working arrangements once they've been agreed to at regular intervals to make sure they're meeting everyone's, expectations and needs. And also, making sure there is, documentation. Lawyers love paper, but I would always say, make sure we're on the same page in terms of what's been agreed, and manage expectations if you're going to utilise things like trial periods and the like. And also consider some other avenues for providing flexibility. For those of you who are based in Victoria, under the Victorian Long Service Leave Act, there's the ability to take one day at a time. And I know a lot of individuals have been using that as a way of having ad hoc flexibility, obviously with the agreement of their employer, and seeking to use it in those sorts of ways. So it doesn't always have to be a set in stone flexible working arrangement, but just seeking to find flexibility that works for both you and for the individual. And again, that really fosters that sense of trust and engagement, and of course, a really positive ongoing relationship.
Thank you, Georgie. So we're aware that we have just given you a huge amount of information, and the good news is that we're also going to give you something to make it a bit simpler for you. So as part of this project, we've built a platform called the Parent Well. As I said, the project is government funding. It's completely free to all the users. And on this platform, we have a number of different resources, which I'll just quickly talk you through. So the first one is this interactive simulator to practice some of those critical conversations that happen in the perinatal period. doing. So there's a conversation around flexible working hours. There's a conversation with a mum and a dad about pregnancy loss. There's also one about broader perinatal mental health distress, and one about returning to work. So you can jump on there and actually practice the conversation. We're also in the process of developing these 3-minute explainer videos. So just on key topics, 3-minute videos that sort of give you everything you need to know in a nutshell, and then a supporting material that can help you navigate the process. We've got step-by-step guides for parents, managers, and expectant business owners. This is called a downloadable toolkit, and it effectively gives you a workbook that you and your employee can work through together. So you download the manager one, they download the employee one, and it gives you guidance that's relevant to you as a manager or you as an employee, and it brings you together at key points. So it will say, you know, at this time period, come and have a conversation about the keeping in touch plan. Here's a template. Here's what you need to cover in the conversation, and here are, you know, some links to the legal obligations. So it's sort of like a one-stop shop for everything you need to do in order to manage an employee's parental leave. And there's also one if you are the business owner and needing to step back from the business, and guidance around how you might do that in a practical way. Connected to that at the bottom right is the journey planner. And as somebody said earlier, it's difficult to manage when you have multiple employees having children or going on parental leave, not only for the fairness, but also just from a logistical point of view, to think, who have I had a keeping in touch conversation with, and who should I be keeping in touch with? We have a tool on the platform that allows you to enter your employees, and it will track for you where they are on the parental leave journey, and flag key moments for you to take care of. We've got sample policies and fact sheets that we've developed with Georgie. And then there's also a fact sheet around the paid parental leave that we've worked on with an accountant, so that we get that side of it simplified for you. And then finally, there's some confidential self-screening for parents, so they can go on there and measure their well-being. And if they are at high risk of distress, they can find information about how to get support. So there's a wealth of information on the Parent Well site, and we're about to launch the pilot. So there's a QR code on the screen. If you want to grab your mobile, you can scan it right now. That will take you to a sign-up page where you can register to join the pilot when it goes live. Joining the pilot means that you have access to all of this, and we will just send occasional requests for you to tell us what you think. So while you're in the platform, you might get a pop-up that says, did you find that resource helpful? There's a survey at the end. It's not very onerous, but we would really love you to participate in the pilot, so that we know that we're on the right track, and that we're really giving you as a business owner the right resources at the right time to help you manage this transition well. So please jump on and register, even if you're not sure. It gives you first look at the site when it goes live, and it means that you can jump on and have a look even if you decide not to participate fully. We'll send out a tip sheet at the end of this session. Actually, I'll skip ahead to show you where that is. There's a tip sheet that's been developed just for pharmacy. So it summarizes what we talked about in terms of the plan, connect, and set up, addressing some of the considerations for pharmacy. That will be sent out by Annika at the end of this webinar. I think she'll send that out tomorrow. And there are various other resources available for you on the COPE website, but you can access all of this inside the Parent Well. So I really encourage you to jump on and sign on. If you missed that QR code, the website is theparentwell.com.au, but you can scan it on your pharmacy tip sheet that you will get tomorrow. So I might just jump back to you, Daniel, and ask you whether there are any questions for us, and then we can spend the last few minutes addressing those.
Outstanding. So yes, I do have a couple of questions here. So you've obviously spoken about lots of positive things, ways to get things done well. But we know not everybody gets it perfect all of the time. What are some of the things that you've seen employers get wrong, or things that maybe they commonly get wrong when managing parental leave?
Georgie, would you like to answer that from a legal perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think some of it is not familiarizing yourself with the key aspects and then tripping up in that way. And I think just given that it is such a critical phase in someone's life, that can really damage then the sense of support and what have you. And one of the other key ones, I think, is that consultation requirement during parental leave, and making decisions about the business that might impact that person's role, and then thinking, I will tell them when the parental leave is over, but even though the changes are being made during the parental leave, and then they might hear from a colleague or what have you, and that is obviously potentially a very damaging situation, leaving aside the legal implications or non-compliance there. So that communication is really important.
What about if somebody joins the business, joins the pharmacy, then they fall pregnant right away or very close to, starting, having begun the employment, and they don't meet the 12-month continuous service threshold? How's that situation navigated?
Yeah, that comes up actually reasonably often. And I think from a strict legal perspective, they're not entitled to the return to work guarantee. So, the employer is entitled, strictly speaking, to replace that person on an ongoing basis, whereas they wouldn't be if they were eligible for unpaid parental leave. I think, if it's someone that you really want to keep engaged with, it's always worth, trying to manage expectations about that, but also, keep communication lines open. If they haven't met that threshold, they're not entitled to unpaid parental leave, but that doesn't mean you can't exceed your legal obligations if it's someone you really want to keep, and, keep in touch with and see if there are opportunities for them to rejoin the organisation once they're ready to.
We know that flexible working arrangements is a hot topic across all industries, not just the pharmacy industry. Are there ways of trialing flexible work if you're not sure whether it's going to suit your business or not?
Yeah, for sure. And I think often there's a fear, particularly if someone's requesting something that hasn't been put in place before, or it's a bit of a new space, that, if we agree to this, we're locked in forever and we'll have to wear it. I always suggest that there can be trial periods, and Vanessa sort of spoke to that a bit earlier, and looking to be flexible within flexibility. And a huge part of that is just managing expectations, having really good communication. And I usually suggest, let's say, if it doesn't look like it's something that we've done before and we're unsure how it will work, put it in place for a few months, have a review point if there needs to be some tweaks, have a conversation about it, but then have those ongoing reviews to make sure it's still meeting everyone's needs. And as long as the communication is really good, usually you can navigate that quite effectively. And I think it's a much better option in terms of trying to maximise engagement and that person's longevity with the organisation if you make real efforts to try and accommodate it, even if just for that trial period.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on that, Vanessa?
Yeah, I'm just thinking as I'm listening to Georgie's response there, is that one of the other things that I think it can be quite tricky for business owners is that fear of, but if I let one person do it, I'm going to have to let everyone else do it too. And I think that's a very valid fear. And I think one of the things that you can try is just talking to all of your employees about their situations and what their goals are in terms of managing their work-life world, because not everybody wants it, and everybody will find different adjustments useful. So sometimes you can talk to your other team members at the same time and say, I'd like to also understand what your priorities are and what would make a big difference for you. And often you'll find that, one person might well want part-time hours, but the other person just wants to leave early on Wednesdays to go to a gym class. Flexibility doesn't mean everybody's going part-time. It probably means lots of people have different variations. And if you can approach that with, well, what can we do? What is possible? You can sometimes find ways that you didn't think were possible. So again, coming back to that just flexible mindset, there is a legal obligation when you have somebody with a child, but there's also the opportunity to explore that more broadly in the organization to go, well, what tweaks can we make for you? You know, I can't have everybody doing this, but let's see what will work for you. And just sort of opening that conversation with your entire workforce.
It's an interesting point you make, because I wonder whether business owners, managers, they feel the pressure to come up with a solution rather than simply having a conversation with employees. And as you rightly say, sometimes the solutions will come through the group and having those conversations. So when you spoke about somebody wanting to go to a gym class early on a Wednesday, the group having that conversation potentially then comes together and says, well, if you want to go early on Wednesdays, I could probably cover that if you wanted to cover me in the morning, so I could go to yoga or go and help with the kids once a week at school or whatever. Do we see instances of that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I certainly do, Georgie. I'm sure you do as well. I see that a lot in workplaces where there is a culture of acceptance around the fact that life and work have to tie into each other. And I think that's really evident post-COVID, during and post-COVID, that, you know, you can't necessarily leave everything at the door. And so the more that there is a culture of talking about what would be helpful, I think just enables some of those conversations to come to the fore. And then, of course, you need the co-workers to support each other, because how can you manage as a business owner if they are not supporting each other? So, you know, sometimes by opening it up to more people, you actually find some solutions where everybody gets a bit of what they want. And I think also being honest about what you can and can't accommodate, but starting from a point of let's see what is possible and then we'll try it, and always giving things a go with some limitations. As Georgie said, make sure you've got it in writing, make sure that you've got a limited time period, and just see. And I think just being willing to do that often goes a long way in terms of people understanding. They might see some of the challenges for themselves and go, oh, okay, I can see where the problems are. And then it's another problem-solving conversation. Right? Not trying to say this is easy, by the way. We know that this is very easy to say, but it can be quite difficult to navigate. But we've found some of those strategies quite helpful.
Yeah, I think it's sage advice. So that pretty much covers the questions that have come through, ladies. So once again, thank you for presenting, for your time. We're very appreciative of you giving up your time after hours to come and share with the group your insights and experiences and advice. Very, very much appreciated. A reminder to everybody, Vanessa and Georgie have positioned some fantastic resources, and you will get a copy of the slides. So be sure to make use of those. But also a reminder that a recording of this session will be available shortly on our YouTube channel, the Guild's YouTube channel. And if it's not enough content for you, as I mentioned at the start, please check out the PBCN podcast, because we've got more than 100 episodes there waiting for you, and it's full of the same sort of amazing stories and insights and expertise that the ladies have shared tonight. And it comes from right across the country, and it'll help you not only understand more about the world of pharmacy and business management, but also the patients that you get to meet and care for throughout your career. So if you're interested, just head to guild.org.au/podcast or search for PBCN in your favourite podcast app. So Vanessa, Georgie, thank you once again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. To the participants, same to you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.